The following discussion is for entertainment purposes only and should not be considered any kind of financial advice. All right, hello and welcome to the Jump Pod, a Unioverse podcast where we talk about all things Web3 and gaming. I'm Christopher Albrecht, and with me as always is my co-host Grant Hart. How you doing, Grant?
I'm doing well. I'm a little sick, under the weather, but we'll get through it. We have exciting guests today.
We have exciting guests today. We're doing things we're jumping just like head first into a controversy today. Our second episode, just, coming in hot out of the gate. We're going to talk about NFT royalties. There's a movement among NFT marketplaces and even some NFT projects about making creator royalties optional, paying creator royalties optional. Is this good, bad, inevitable? We've assembled a fantastic panel to break it all down. I'm super excited to be joined today by the co-founder and CTO of the Unioverse, so my boss, Wyeth Ridgway. Wyeth, welcome to the Jump Pod.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be here.
And from the Hyperspace NFT marketplace, we've got Benny from Hyperspace. Welcome to the show, Benny.
It's good to be here. How are you doing today?
Good, thanks. All right, Wyeth, I'm going to start with you. Tell me a little bit, just describe the situation. Where are we at? Why are we having this discussion today?
Well, I'll start with what we've told people when we go to lay people and try to sell them on NFTs. The way that we often explain it is this kind of really easy to understand promise. What if you went back in time and Stan Lee had the ability to claim a percentage of every time his comic traded hands, and how would that have transformed not just his individual success, but also just transformed the way that a franchise worked? And that's really the transformative thing that NFTs promise, and one of the reasons why we thought, hey, there's something revolutionary here. That little percentage, whether it's 1%, 5%, whatever, that gives an alignment of incentives between the creator and ultimately the utility and the value of whether it's a comic book franchise or a piece of music. It just opens up so many doors that are not available in the way that royalties and franchises exist today. So because of that promise, it both interested us, but then it interested a bunch of other creators, musicians, authors, all sorts of people took this bet on the way that NFTs would work. And they, some people did an initial sale of their NFTs. Some people gave NFTs out for free, just hoping that this creator revenue would become their success over time. And if they did the due diligence and the work, that people would start trading those NFTs and that they would ultimately, recoup the investments that they've made with that. So the unfortunate thing is that while that promise was made to these early creators, it wasn't actually enforceable on the blockchain. So I've had educated people who think they understand how NFTs work actually surprised to hear this, but the royalty rates, while you can put them in your contract, are not enforced. And so what you end up doing is going to a marketplace like OpenSea or Rarible or whoever, and signing essentially a secondary deal where you literally just type in the revenue percentage you expect right there on the spot, and then work under their terms of service to actually get paid. Then what happened, sort of prominently with X2Y2, and now is kind of happening with more marketplaces, potentially as a result of the crypto market tanking and people wanting to mitigate their losses or potentially to gain market share. Basically, you have people making these payments optional. And, when I first heard this, I thought there's going to be huge pushback. Like, you can't go screwing your creator community like this. If you screw the creators, you're not going to have any content, and the whole thing's going to collapse on itself. But unfortunately, 24 hours ago, I looked at the marketplace positions on DApp Radar, and X2Y2 is now second by volume. And third is Magic Eden, and then they came out with an announcement of this deal with Coral, which is also potentially a 0% marketplace. And so now I feel like we're kind of on this cusp where it is possible that we will screw all of these tens of thousands of creators who have come in here early, taken a bet on this business model. And if they find that, a promise that was made was not enforceable and has now been circumvented by marketplaces wholesale, I think that we'll just do a huge injustice to the effort of onboarding new content creators. So that's where we find ourselves today, I think.
So just sort of distilling it down, right now it used to be, 3 months ago, you release an NFT, you get money on that sale, and then you would get recurring revenue every time that sale transacted, anytime that NFT sold in the secondary market. And what we're hearing now, what there's a movement now, is that these secondary payments are becoming optional. Benny, you're with the marketplace. Tell us a little bit about what Hyperspace does and sort of how are you viewing this whole this move towards no royalties? Because it's kind of, as Wyeth said, it's starting with marketplaces like X2Y2, I think SudoSwap and Yaw, I think are the ones that have been written about the most. But tell us a little bit about Hyperspace first, and then what you see happening.
Yeah, so first I'll just say for those who don't know, Hyperspace is kind of this all-in-one NFT platform on Solana, just aggregating all marketplace listings, whether zero royalties, etc. So the way I see it from just in general is a lot of knee-jerk reactions recently, and that goes to the project level too with DeGods going to 0% royalties. People are just kind of experimenting right now. With Hyperspace, we've kind of just stayed steady, even with everybody else, and we've had a 1% marketplace fee from the get-go, and respecting creator royalties. And it's a good question of like, what's the right answer? And I don't think it's been found yet, and I think it takes a lot of like high-level discussion. So I just wanted to run down like real quick like the breakdown. So whenever y'all launched with no fees back in like July. There was a lot of like lack of attention surrounding it. People kind of neglected it. But in reality, the way that was created is because then they could attack towards market share because people were just using Magic Eden, for example, because they dominated the marketplace. There's consumer preference and all that. And since then, there's been other ones like Solnar. And the real reason I think royalties are really getting into question now is because there's these AMMs or automated market makers on Solana now with NFTs, and they're going towards low fees or zero fees, and now there's all this fragmentation and royalties are really in question. And I think there needs to be a balance because I think consumers don't understand that without creators then there are no NFTs, there are no communities. They can just go onto Web2, and I think that's one of the unique things that makes like a JPEG or an NFT.
Okay, so is this then? Go ahead, Grant. Sorry.
I was going to say, I definitely think you touched on something that I want to jump in, on this conversation, if not now. It is that Yaw was this sneaky, not in a bad way, right? I'm not saying it was sneaky in terms of marketing bad behavior or anything, but it was sneaky in terms of the market, right? And one thing that Yaw and even Famous Foxes, Benny, that we know close because it is a little bit more soul heavy, is doing these also other utility, marketing campaigns like raffling off NFTs with 0% royalties again, right? Because that person is getting back a certain coin. So, for example, what a lot of DeGod holders were doing, Vinny and I remember this coming from the DeGods community, is that people were actually raffling their DeGod, accepting dust when it was like $2 and making, let's say, $25,000 of dust. No dust would then get kicked back to the community, right? So this was a really easy way for market like a Yaw, like a marketplace like Yaw, to say hands off. Hey, we didn't say 0%, but we're not also kicking it back at the same time. So it goes back to Benny. I think there was this kind of high level of sneaky marketplaces in the background, not in a bad way, not negative connotation, but not being fully transparent. And I think we found ourselves here, and it's very quick. And like I always say, a week in Web3 is like 3 in Web2, or 3 months in Web2. Like next week we're already going to talk about something else. So that's what I worry about. I'm glad we're doing the show because we do get to focus on royalties we're on a 24-hour news cycle, it seems like.
So let me ask an uncomfortable question here, Wyeth. I'll point it towards you. Isn't this just capitalism? Like, we all enjoy it when we get a cheap thing from Amazon, right? And they've decimated industries by going in and offer things, at a lower price. Is that what we're at, or is it something more foundational or something more existential that we're looking at?
Well, I mean, I've got to say, if you bought an NFT for 50 grand and are now selling it at a loss and have the opportunity because a dialogue pops up to say, do you want to lose another 6% or 7%? And you can say no to that. It's an understandable, it's an understandable point of view that the consumer is going to say, no, I'm already taking a loss. I don't want to take more of a loss. And so it's tough because from a consumer's perspective, obviously most people, generally want to support creators, but not when they're looking at financial losses. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, well, if we're not protecting, core NFT principles, if we're not taking care of our creators in bad times, like as soon as the market swings down, we go back to Web 2, what were we doing in the first place? So from the consumer's perspective, I understand what's going on. But I really think that we need to look at this through the lens of protecting these creator expectations. If somebody, made a track for an album and put it out there for free, assuming that they would eventually, their hard work, 6 months of work going into a track, they release it for free and they assume that their hard work's going to be repaid through these secondary royalties. And now you tell them that just went to zero. They don't get to claw back any of their rights. As I've had extensive IP discussions in recent months because we're dealing with some IP issues and how to deal with this ecosystem correctly. And once you open up or define rights in a certain way, it's very difficult, or if not impossible, to claw them back. So I take it back to that. The way that we need to look at this, and it's in my mind, an existential crisis for the way that you're going to think of the future of the NFT industry, is if we don't find mechanical ways to protect creators' expectations, whether or not those were enforceable from day one, we are just going to have a huge downturn. You can't burn tens of thousands of creators and then expect a new line of creators to come down the road making new content. So content's just going to dry up.
Yeah, Benny, what are you hearing from your crowd and your community over on Hyperspace? Has there been anything that you've heard?
Like what specifically? I've heard a lot.
Well, what's the best of what you've heard, right? Let's put it this way: are most people like on the side of the creators on this? We've in this conversation we've referenced Web 2 a lot, right? And this seems like kind of going backwards. But what's the sentiment you're hearing from sort of your users?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because we're the platform for traders, right? But we also see where creators lie, and I think you got to separate these two categories. There are traders and collectors, right? Traders will do whatever they can to have as much profit as possible, and that typically will include cutting out royalties. And with the way Solana markets are, most of them are, cutting out creator royalties altogether. I think it's a lot of pushback to like projects where it's like 10%, and you could justify that that's quite high. And another thing is like DeGods, they just went to zero, right? And if they're the top project, then it's got everybody kind of siding with them. So yeah, there's a lot of discussion going on.
Yeah, I think that was, we could jump into it about DeGods. The DeGods is a little bit more concerning in a grand scheme of things, right? And is there a world where we sit here and go, hey, is this 0% royalty conversation happening if more NFT projects were offering different varieties of utility? I feel like there might be a stale position we're in right now where NFT projects are all offering the same thing, right? With your exception, obviously, to let's say Yuga Labs and Bored Ape, but they're already going through their own thing, right, within the last couple of days. But let's think from a mid to top tier NFT project on Solana or Ethereum. They launch, right? They have a successful launch, let's say. They set their creator royalties to 8%, 10%, or 5%. They roll out a coin, they roll out staking, maybe some physical goods in there, but that's about it, right? Maybe they do some raffles. Is it just are we in a world in NFT in the Web3 space where people are bored with NFT projects, so now they're turning their focus on things that they already have issues about? I feel like if there was a project adding real utility and different types of utility, I don't know if this creator royalty conversation happens as frequently, right? I think we're in a stale time, and traders are not feeling like their NFTs are growing in price or depreciating in price even, I think, and that's sometimes healthy. I feel like they're trying to take that into their control of their own hands, right? So going out and seeking these other other marketplaces. And I think for DeGods, this is what I'm talking about. Like, you just saw, I know, Benny, you probably saw this, but for Wyeth and Chris, like, the head artist over at DeGods just left. Like, he just left, got up and left one day, and he listed all of his DeGods.
Grant, it might be helpful if you walk us through what happened with DeGods, right?
Yeah. Go ahead, Benny.
Go ahead, Benny.
Yeah, so I think it's important to note, like, so people were annoyed at kind of the small minority of the creator royalties in the 0% markets when they were doing probably under 15-20% of the market share. And Magic Eden introduced this tool with Coral Cube, who they now bought, and who knows if they bought them back then, we don't know. Where they were gonna create this meta shield, which would protect creator royalties by blurring NFTs with royalty debt. And there was a lot of backlash in regards to that move. And recently, you've seen this capitulation with Coral Cube now 0% royalties and a complete 180 from that initiative. And I think just like that sentiment pushed it towards like zero royalties and using the other marketplaces. And it's just been knee-jerk reactions back and forth between both marketplaces and the community.
Yeah.
And
Can I interject one thing?
The majority wants to seek a middle ground balance.
Yeah, go ahead, Wyeth.
So, from my perspective, I don't really care what DeGods does, or frankly, anyone who's already raised their money, like them making a choice to go to 0% royalties or whatnot. It just doesn't matter. I feel like it's certainly in the game crypto space, game NFT space, we don't have our killer app yet. We don't have, the Grand Theft Auto that is going to bring millions of people into, crypto enabled gaming, which I ultimately think, has the potential to disrupt a platform kind of like Steam. So we need to protect the ability for that future thing that's amazing, that drags millions of users in. We need to protect the ability for that to exist. And so we need to look at this through the lens of the creators of today, of now, starting something up. What are they doing? In a marketplace where you can no longer make, enormous raises on your mint, and now you can not necessarily rely on having any sort of secondary revenue. If you're pushing some, Grand Theft Auto vision that uses NFTs and you're trying to get funding from a VC, what are they going to say? Their risk is enormous, right? What is the business model in a ecosystem where something that fundamental can change?
It is an interesting point, right? And I do agree in terms of the gaming side, right? Like you said, there hasn't been that big game, right? That big gaming.
And that's the utility you were alluding to.
Right. That's right.
We need that utility.
100%. There needs to be a utility that it's so advanced for the Web3 space that it makes you almost block out all the pains that we have in Web3. And I think, I don't consider artist royalties a pain, but as your daily NFT trader, they're going to say the other, right? And I think once that utility starts matching the incentive to get your return back and more, that's when I think Web3 advances a little bit. And I've always said that, right? I come from a gaming background, obviously with you, Wyeth, and Chris A. over at Unioverse. I'm going to side that way, but I felt that way before, and I still feel that way. And I think, if anything, this just shows us that gaming is probably going to have to be the saving grace of Web3. I think as we move forward in this trader, volatile, this area we're in. And Benny, I want to chat with you about this too. This is starting to remind me, I come from a DeFi background, but this is starting to remind me of Web2 ICO days. And the reason why I say that is because, let me just break this down. I don't want to rant, but let me break this down as to why I'm thinking like this. So you have an NFT project, let's say, that's bootstrapped, doesn't have the VC funding from like a Play, Animoca, Asymmetrical, anything, right, Andreessen? And you're not going to get any artist royalties. So you're banking on either A, having a kick-ass utility, which is probably not going to happen, or B, you need to have a great mint out. And so let's say you mint out, right? But let's also look at now the post-mint. How are you going to make money? How?
There's been a huge argument about that. So one of the most successful projects on Solana is Taio Robotics. They've been focused on just generating different forms of revenue streams for months.
Right.
I also think the same with the Foxes, right? They've been building away. They got the Foxy Ding, which
Hmm.
allows you to send messages. They got the artists, like the you can hire an artist now, and they're just taking small fees, and it's all going back towards the
Right.
business.
In terms of the ICO analogy, is you're just going to start seeing a lot more NFT projects pop up, make money, and then fizzle out, right? And that's what I think is going to happen in certain ways. In some ways it won't, but I think it incentivizes people to spin up these projects, launch them, and see what happens. And then if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. They can blame it on artist royalties.
Well, the other way to look at it, Grant, is instead of selling something that has permanent value, which is really the interesting claim to me. So, for example, I would love to sell you let's say I'm selling you a flaming sword that can be used in a whole bunch of different games. Right. And the more you play with it, the more powerful it becomes, the better history it has, or let's say that there's a basketball and it can play it in all sorts of different basketball games and it keeps track of, top esports players who have used it in games. Those are interesting premises that were sold, last year and earlier as like, this is what NFTs promise. But if I have to keep selling something, in your analogy, right? No creator royalties, then rather than me being incentivized to give you that thing that has permanent increasing utility over time, I'm more incentivized to do something kind of like what Benny's saying, where we just come up with more things to sell.
Right.
So here's your flame sword. It only lasts this season, right? You need to buy another one for our next season. Seasons are very popular in games. They're a way to get people to subscribe. At what point do I then start just selling you a subscription?
Right.
Or, at what point does this actually just look exactly like Web 2? Like, if we're not creating assets that are fundamentally valuable over a long period of time,
Yeah.
and owning it and keeping it and building it, is not a workable, proposition. I have to keep coming up with new NFTs to mint to keep experiencing an influx of revenue to keep my business afloat. It really takes away some of the most interesting things, some of the most fascinating, conversations I've seen in overlapping gaming and NFTs. I really think it just shoots that in the face.
Yeah, and that's what Frank exactly said on the call. I was on a call with Frank and a couple other people and from the DGOTS community, and he was talking about 0% royalties before they even did it. And his solution was, well, if we do airdrops, we can just airdrop. We'll gate it with 375 dust, but then you have to pay one sol on top of that. I might as well. That's the same thing as me buying a new NFL Red Sunday ticket every season the NFL comes. I don't want to do that every time, right? And I don't want that Web 2 version. I don't want recurring payments every month. So,
do you think it's possible that it'll pay to reveal for youths?
it's funny that you say that.
Say what you mean by that.
Yeah, go ahead, Benny.
Oh, so the art hasn't revealed, and you'll have to pay to reveal that art. I've heard a rumor going around that's an idea just floating around, and I believe there's probably some serious thought behind that.
Yeah. So for the audience that doesn't know too much about the DGODs and Utes community, so DGODs is obviously the number one community in NFT just in terms of pure volume and notoriety on the Solana ecosystem, and they released their second project called Utes. And without diving too much into it, they noticed that OTC deals were absolutely killing them. And it became so much of a kill to their project that they were losing somewhere around like $8,000 in like a week setting. And to a project that's still pretty big. And their motivation behind doing Utes was, hey, we're going to drop this thing called a tube. And when we drop a tube, they're all similar. So they're just like a little potion looking NFT. And if you owned a dead god or a DGOD, you automatically had one. You had to pay for it in dust, which is the coin you get back for staking your DGOD. But then on the other side, if you wanted to get a Ute, you also had to apply for it. So there was no whitelist grinding for whitelist or anything. You applied to be a whitelist holder. And so when they did the tube release, you could, if you sold that tube via OTC or did not pay the full royalties, the person receiving the tube that purchased it actually had to pay back the dust that was lost in the trade, the royalty spot, in order to eventually reveal that tube. And so like Benny said, there has been a delay of art reveal for probably 2 months. I had to look at my calendar, probably 2 months. I have it on my calendar from 2 months ago. I've been looking forward to it for a long time. And it's been a very long period of time. And so what Benny is saying, hey, look, if DGODS goes to 0%, which they did, are things like Utes going to be paid to reveal? And I think that's very harmful. I do. I think this goes exactly to what we're saying is I already minted the NFT. I abided by your rules, right? Now this is where I'm at.
To give you another example, with my idea of a flame sword or something, you own it, but then let's say you bring it to my game and I say, yeah, you can use that, but pay me $5 to use it in the game.
Right.
Like, if we go down that road, we have, turned, rather than this clean, beautiful way to potentially, alter a marketplace fundamentally, we're going to have, the worst practices in freemium gaming, mobile trickery, where there's 50 types of currency and you need to jump through weird hoops to get what you expect. And, it's just going to be the sort of the worst practices that you see in mobile gaming right now.
I agree.
Yeah, well, I mean, because I just heard what you said, Grant, and it made me want to set my computer on fire. Like, I don't even understand what was going on, right? Like, I'm just going to throw it in the ocean. Fine, whatever, we're done. Take it away. Because, well, that's the big problem, right? Like, you want to onboard a lot of people into Web3, and games is a way to do that. But suddenly, if it becomes this thing where you've got tubes and dust and, I sound like a boomer, but like, it becomes so complicated. You're just like, well, why would I even bother? I'm just going to turn on my Xbox and, play whatever is on, you know what I mean? Like, it just seems like it is just, before it's even getting out of the gate, like NFTs just the whole market seems to like, it can't get out of its own way.
Yeah.
I mean, even Benny, what have you seen? Like, just in terms of, how long has Hyperspace been up and running?
So Hyperspace was originally Soul Analysis about a year ago, just focused on data. So we've been in the ecosystem. We rebranded to Hyperspace in February because we saw the need for like aggregation on Solana. And yeah, we've been building away since.
What kind of data insights? I don't know if you have anything that's sort of germane to the discussion here.
So like we have wallet statistics, we have like all marketplace statistics. Like, we were kind of the first to show market caps and floor price movements and just stuff like that. And now there's a ton of tools, and a lot of people use our APIs for stuff like that as well. Are
we just in this? What's sort of the end game here? Is it just a arms race between people to create, like, implement technological innovations that would like enforce the contract, and people creating systems to get around it? It sounds like a lot like copyright.
That's
right?
a good question. I'm actually in a meeting with some high-level tech people at OpenSea later today, because we're going to be talking about smart contract options to, what does the future of tech look like for smart contracts that might protect creator interests? And there are ways, in fact, I think we're going to publicly post our smart contract, and people can see how we're doing a whitelist, blacklist solution that will help us have some tools to deal with marketplaces that choose not to pay creator royalties. But you're right. I kind of, my layperson explanation of this is very, very similar to what you used to see with police radars and radar detectors. We're just going to be doing this little dancing game of who's got the better solution right now. And certainly most of the easy to adopt solutions can then also be worked around, with fairly little effort by marketplaces. So yeah, I think cat and mouse is the right way to describe it. I will say, regardless of the sort of somber tone of the current state of affairs, I am quite confident that there is going to be an evolution of smart contracts and technological solutions that solve this and make this a solved problem. And in fact, the very inevitability of that solution is kind of what concerns me right now, because if we go through the next 6-9 months or however long it takes to get to, that sort of standard and those sorts of practices, and in the meantime, we've just screwed all of these people, that are taking a leap of faith on how creator royalties are supposed to work. It will just start a long recovery process to get those new creators back who are willing to take a chance and build some content, and a lot of lost, confidence, and that's very, very hard, to recover from. I don't know if you remember. So you need to. Everyone needs to recall that creators are the front line of adoption, right? So as soon as you have creators turn on technology, adoption's gonna dry up. And I remember back when Ticketmaster was basically a monopoly. You had a couple of prominent bands like Pearl Jam and whatnot actually take a step back and say, Ticketmaster's fucking everybody. And that's when negative sentiment towards Ticketmaster actually became commonplace. People thought Ticketmaster was a great service, everyone used it, but as soon as those frontline creators started saying, and pointing out this is how they're screwing everyone, it really changed the public's impression of Ticketmaster. If we have something like that happen here, it's very hard to recover from. I do think there will be a technical solution. I do think there's even short-term practices that can be implemented. Our terms of service, for example, are going to basically say, if you purposely avoid the smart contract revenue with whatever, transactions you're making, we reserve the right to forego utility. I don't know exactly the legalese of that, but, it is no secret that we're making a business founded on increased utility and ongoing creator rights or revenue. And, if you circumvent those, then, why would we continue to provide increased utility for that? So, it's going to be a little bit of warfare. It's going to be very chaotic over the next couple of months. I think if there was one more shoe to fall and you saw OpenSea go to, 0 royalties, it would be a huge blow to this entire problem.
I think one thing I wanted to talk about as well is, in backpacking off what Wyeth said, that project will start doing something with their terms of service or coming out and speaking out against this. Benny, did you see Galactic Geckos and what they posted?
Yeah, genuine articles. I've talked to him pretty, I would say infrequently, but I've talked to him before. He seems like he's trying to attack the project the right way from like a creator perspective.
So to give you guys some perspective inside what I'm talking about, Galactic Geckos is a Solana project, and they came out and said, hey, look, we don't love this idea of 0% royalties. We're making a list of any transactions that happen on this marketplace. We're going to blur or mess with the IP or the NFT and how it looks. And I think you're going to see more projects like that. Going back to exactly what Wyeth said, right? Wyeth with gaming, it's going to be, hey, in a skate game, every time you try to do a trick, if you bought that skateboard or whatever the case is on a 0% royalty, you'll crash every time, right? Like the utility would be pointless. With like a sword, the sword will never work, right? You'll die every time. So I think being very, unique in the ways that like, challenging to gamers or creators, but I think with traders, you have to kind of focus and do what Galactic Geckos did to where say, hey, look, we understand that you want to make profit. We understand that you're also going to lose profit, but 0% royalties is not the answer. And if you do go on these marketplaces, we're already making a PSA on that.
So Benny, I want you to look ahead here real quick or just get a sense of what's happening. Where do you see all this playing out? How do you see this playing out?
I think we'll eventually reach this kind of like middle ground. It's going to take some time, and there's going to be a lot of dust floating around the ecosystem. There's just a lot of, I don't know, unexpected decisions. Like the DeGods one was unexpected. They didn't need to do that. They're making 50,000 a week off of royalties, regardless of the other, 0% marketplaces. I think there's some reasoning there where I don't think the general public really considers why they did it. But it's just a lot of that, and it'll take some time to sort it. But at the end of the day, I think it'll be driven by creators. Whatever the decision will be driven by creators.
Benny, why do you think DeGods did that? Because if you saw that tweet that Frank deleted, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Why do you think they did it? Do you think it has something to do with that call?
I mean, I have various reasons. This is a lot of reckless speculation. I think maybe something to do with the art, and this could be a distraction from that. I don't know. That's a reckless speculation. And I don't know, like maybe it's just on the news. I don't know. There's this, like they're front and center. People are talking about DeGods. This is another good marketing. Like Frank, like believe it or not, I think all press is good press. And there was one more. I think like, you could consider like royalties as a way of survival, right? And if you're an established project, like an established creator project, And also, I think there's the thing of like, oh, we're approaching like this bigger territory where we could be a security. Like maybe that's why they're zero royalties. There's a lot of different
Yeah.
factors that I think could have went into their
It's funny that
decision.
you bring that up, and I don't like to shed light on people that I think kind of put some negativity in the space. But I will bring up Urcon, who is Chris A. Urcon is a very polarizing person in the Solana ecosystem. He is famously known for holding the #1 ranked DGOD. They made a 1 of 1 for him. So he has a very 1 of 1 DGOD for him. But he also came out with his own project, Degen Sweepers. Don't want to put too much light on what he said or what he's doing, but what he said was very interesting. When the board when the Yuga Labs and ApeCoin was flagged by SEC, he made a tweet saying, "This is not the only coin that you guys all know that will be flagged as well." I thought that was very interesting because it kind of goes back to what you just said, Benny, is could Dust be looked at as a value proposition? Because there was some language that the DGOTS team was using that would blur those lines a little bit, right? Kind of almost guaranteeing value, saying that, hey, you'll be rewarded with this. It's a funding mechanism. There was some very interesting lingo. And so I wonder if 0% royalties does have to deal with that.
Well, all right. Wyeth, where do you think this is all going? I mean, so we're on the creator side, right? The Unioverse. Our pitch is our NFTs, our hero characters, or how you access the games. And so where do you see, that's a very much a utility case, right? Like,
Well, I know a lot of projects that are in their mid to late tier of development that are working on utility. So it's weird because we're at this moment in time where right now we look at a whole bunch of PFP projects, where, it is one thing to say, hey, let's cut creator royalties for this JPEG I've got, for my Twitter account, because what value am I getting out of it on an ongoing basis? But if you looked across a landscape right now, in a make-believe world, where you were actually getting all sorts of ongoing utility services, game abilities, whatever from your NFTs, it would be a completely different, situation. If you looked at cutting access to, your level 40 character that was in a game that could move from game to game, or, some weapon skin that you've got that's ultra rare that, that has utility in lots of different first-person shooter games, that would be a different conversation altogether. So I think people fall into this trap of looking at what's going on now and projecting it into the future and making a decision, where I'm looking at, things that are in development where people have approached this problem we're providing a utility basis. And in that context, I think everyone involved would have different opinions, maybe about how this should play out. But I see the next couple of months as really going to be polarizing. There's going to be more conversations like this one. People are going to fall on different sides depending on where they're coming from it. A lot of funded projects, again, I don't really care what positions they take, because those aren't the projects I think that are ultimately going to transform the industry. It's the ones that are coming out that haven't launched yet that are the ones that are really going to fulfill a larger vision. And how they approach this problem in a changing landscape, in particular, if we see all three of the top marketplaces, wave creator revenue, it's potentially a mess. I'm hoping that you see OpenSea as like the big fish in the marketplace, hold their ground, increase their ability to onboard, mainstream people into crypto and NFTs, and hopefully they control enough of the marketplace that your average transactions are not avoiding these issues.
The ultimate plot twist.
Creator royalties.
The ultimate plot twist after what Wyeth was saying with OpenSea is the beef between Hyperspace and Magic Eden was planted. Magic Eden bought Coral Cube, and OpenSea's about to acquire Hyperspace.
No.
you heard it here first.
I had floated, before Magic Eden announced what they did, I'd floated really just my wish that they were going to announce Polygon bought them. And there's some interesting strategic reasons why Polygon might acquire Magic Eden. Who knows? Maybe we're floating that out there now, and maybe they'll read those tea leaves. But acquiring that as a really effective platform to launch, new mints onto Polygon, and have a loyal audience and following. Like there's a definite symbiosis there. That's what could have been now, but
yeah, I think the chain in general would want like respecting creator loyalties, because I think just in general most people believe like, oh, we need artists in Web3 or, you know, project creators, but specifically artists. Like that's why royalties were in place in the first place, to support artists.
Yep.
And if we're turning that away, then what are we doing here? We're just on the internet.
We're just filming a podcast talking about it at that point.
Yeah.
Just on the internet. All right. Well, that's a good place to leave it. Benny, if people want to find out more about you or Hyperspace, where should they go?
Just hit me up on Twitter. If you ever have questions, just DM me on the main Hyperspace account and I'll reach back.
What is that main Hyperspace account?
Hyperspace XYZ. And then our website is hyperspace.xyz.
Excellent. And Wyeth, you have an article coming up that should post at the same time as this, where people can go to unioverse.com/news and they'll be able to find it. I think we're pretty straightforward in how we see this thing rolling out. But do you want to plug real quick? We've got, you talked the other day in our founders about some collectibles that are coming up. You want to just talk about those real quick so people know?
Yep, go to our Discord, Unioverse.com, and you'll see an announcement about, or follow us, our Twitter's the Unioverse. We're doing a free mint. It's open to the public, end of the month. It's unlimited capacity, but very limited time period. So you need to be paying attention to our social accounts or be in Discord, and when you see the link, you'll be able to get something that's ultimately going to be very interesting to collect.
Happy Halloween, everybody. Get your NFT. Benny, Wyeth, Grant, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. This is great. And I'm sure, we could probably reconvene in a month and talk about this and how it's changed all over again. So we'll see how it settles out. Awesome. But thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.